They whispered that Hollow Fen Forest had its own memory, that it remembered voices even after the singers were gone. Most dismissed it as an old wives' tale, but Lysandra knew better. Every morning the forest proved it to her, and every morning it gave her a reason to sing. Once upon a time, beneath the honey-gold light of late summer, there lived a girl named Lysandra. Every morning she sat on the porch of her small cottage at the forest's edge, her bare feet swinging above the cool earth, and without fail, a small bird named Nyx, with feathers the color of twilight, would come fluttering from the trees. Nyx would perch upon the porch rail, tilt his head toward her, and together they would sing. Their songs wove through the air like silk, a melody that even the wind seemed to pause and listen to. But one morning the rail was empty. The forest beyond was still. Lysandra sang alone, her voice thin against the hush. The next day came, and the next, and still no fluttering wings. She began to feel the silence pressing in, heavy as mist. On the third day, she could bear it no longer. Clutching her shawl, she stepped from the porch and walked toward the forest. Her voice rose as she walked, soft at first, then stronger, calling the melody they had shared, hoping Nyx would answer. The trees closed around her like green curtains, shadows whispered. Birdsong filled the air, but each note belonged to someone else. A thrush, a jay, a blackbird. None were hers, still she sang. It was deep in the woods, when the light had turned dim and green, that she heard it. Nyx's song. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. She followed it, heart quickening, weaving between roots and ferns. The song grew louder, but something was wrong. The voice was strange now, stretched and slow, as if Nyx were imitating himself. Lysandra pushed through a tangle of branches, and stopped. Before her was a small clearing lit by a pale shaft of sunlight. In the center stood not Nyx, but a tall, crooked figure in a coat the color of moss. It wore a mask shaped like a bird's beak, and in its gloved hands dangled a delicate wooden cage. Inside the cage, Nyx sat perfectly still, eyes closed, yet the song came from somewhere else, from the masked figure's mouth. It tilted its head toward her, just like Nyx used to. "Lysandra," it rasped in her bird's melody. "I've been waiting for you." The masked figure stepped forward, moving like drifting smoke. "Come," she said in the lilting mimicry of Nyx's song. "I can take you to him. He is safe, for now." Lysandra, too relieved to question, followed. The figure led her along winding paths until the forest broke apart, revealing an ancient cottage of blackened timber. Its crooked chimney puffed wisps of silver smoke, and its windows glowed with an amber light that seemed far too warm to be trusted. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dried flowers and something sweeter, almost too sweet. Nyx was placed upon a shelf by the fire, his cage swinging gently. The figure removed her mask, revealing the face of a woman with eyes like candle flames and hair the color of ash. "I am Morwen," she said, her voice now her own, low, velvety, dangerous. "And I have waited a very long time to hear a voice like yours." Lysandra stepped back, unease curling in her stomach. But before she could speak, Morwen reached for a silver kettle simmering on the hearth. She poured a fragrant tea into a cup and pressed it into Lysandra's hands. The steam swirled upward in strange shapes, and the moment Lysandra took a sip, her limbs grew heavy, her sight hazy. She felt her voice and her very song shiver inside her throat like a trapped bird. Morwen's lips curved into a satisfied smile. She began to chant in a language older than the trees, her hands weaving through the air. Lysandra gasped, but no sound came. Her voice slipped from her mouth as a shimmer of golden light, swirling like a ribbon, and Morwen caught it in a crystal vial. When the spell was done, Lysandra collapsed into darkness. She awoke to find herself in a small cage beside Nyx. Her throat felt hollow, her voice gone. She tried to speak. Nothing. Only soft, broken sounds emerged. Yet when she hummed, the air still trembled faintly with the ghost of her old melody. Morwen stood before a cracked mirror, holding the vial of Lysandra's voice. She whispered to it, and as the golden light poured into her own throat, her face began to shift. The wrinkles smoothed, the hair darkened, her skin took on the glow of youth. She gazed at her reflection and smiled. "The fairest witch of them all," she murmured. From her cage, Lysandra watched, her eyes blazing, Beside her, Nyx tilted his head, and for the first time, hummed a note that matched her own sound perfectly. It was then she realized. Their melodies were still bound, voice or no voice. While Lysandra sat in the cage, Morwen was not idle. With the vial of stolen voice hidden in the folds of her cloak, she left the crooked cottage and journeyed deep into the heart of the forest, where the witches' coven gathered in a circle of stones older than the moon. There she offered the voice to the coven's high enchantress. The price she asked was not merely beauty. It was beauty that could snare the gaze of the kingdom's young prince, Prince Corvin, for a grand ball was soon to be held in his honor. Morwen's plan was cruel and cunning. Draw the prince to her side, lead him to the coven's hidden lair, and there, under the harvest moon, sacrifice him to seal the witch's power for another 100 years. As the coven began its work, Morwen's face glowed with unnatural youth, her hair spilling like black silk over her shoulders. She smiled, knowing that no mortal heart could resist her now. Far away from the circle of stones, another story was beginning to stir. That same day, Prince Corvin rode into the forest with a band of hunters, seeking fresh game for the feast at the upcoming ball. The air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. But as the hunting horns fell silent, the prince heard something else. A sound unlike any bird or brook he had ever known. It was a melody without words, a weaving of two voices, one human, one avian, that rose and fell in haunting harmony. The tones shimmered like moonlight on water, stirring something deep in his chest. "Did you hear that?" he asked, but the hunters only shook their heads. The prince turned his horse toward the sound, letting it guide him. The melody was faint, slipping between the trees like a shy creature, but it grew clearer with every step. He did not know who sang it, nor why it made the hairs on his arms rise, only that he had to find its source. The deeper he went, the stranger the forest became, the air thicker, the shadows longer, the path narrowing as if to keep him out. Yet still he pressed on, drawn like a moth to a hidden flame, and somewhere ahead, in a small cage beside a twilight-feathered bird, Lysandra hummed her wordless song. She did not know the prince was listening, nor that each note brought him closer. The prince's horse stepped carefully over roots and moss as he neared the source of the melody. It came from a crooked little cottage half swallowed by ivy. The shutters were closed, yet the song drifted through the cracks in the wood like light slipping under a door. He dismounted and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was dim, thick with the smell of dried herbs and something faintly metallic. By the fireplace stood two cages side by side, one holding Nyx, the other holding a young woman with hair that caught the light like spun gold. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, eyes half closed, humming softly in harmony with the bird. The sound stopped when she saw him. Her gaze met his, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, as if they had known each other in another life. Her lips moved urgently, but no words came. Only the shape of them formed. "Help us." The prince's brow furrowed. "Who has done this to you?" She shook her head, eyes wide with fear, then pointed to the door, urging him to hurry. Her hands gripped the bars and she mouthed again, "Please, rescue us." Without hesitation, the prince drew the dagger from his belt and sliced through the lock of her cage. The metal groaned but gave way, and he pulled the door open. She stumbled into his arms, light as a breath. He freed Nyx next, and the bird fluttered to her shoulder, pressing its head against her cheek. Even without her voice, the relief in her eyes was clear as morning sunlight. The prince carried her from the cottage and set her on his horse. The bird nestled close. They rode swiftly through the forest, emerging at last into the open meadows that led to his castle. There, he ordered the healers and servants to see to their every need, food, warmth, rest, for he did not yet know the depth of what she had suffered, only that she would be safe within his walls. Far away, Morwen returned from the coven, her new beauty shimmering like a dangerous jewel. But when she opened the door and found the cages empty, she froze. The smile vanished. A storm gathered in her eyes, yet after a long moment she laughed. Low, rich, unbothered. "They won't last in the world beyond the forest," she murmured to herself. Especially her without a voice. With a dismissive wave, she locked the door behind her and turned her thoughts to the ball. She had a prince to ensnare, and a sacrifice to claim beneath the harvest moon. The days slipped by like pages turning in a book, and the castle was soon alive with preparations for the grand ball. Tapestries were aired, chandeliers polished, and the great hall glittered with candlelight even before the guests had arrived. Lysandra stayed within the prince's keep, wrapped in soft gowns and tended to by gentle hands. Her voice was still gone, but her presence was not silent. She would hum softly in the corridors, Nyx always near, their twin melodies bringing a strange calm to all who heard them. The prince often sought her company. Though she could not speak, her eyes seemed to say everything. Gratitude, warmth, a quiet joy that deepened each time he entered the room. And though neither spoke of it aloud, they both began to sense the threads of something more than friendship winding between them. But in the quiet hours when no one else was near, shadows of dread crept in. She remembered the witch's words the night she had begged for mercy, how Morwen had bent close to whisper her plan, to steal the prince's heart and lead him into the coven's circle, to spill his blood beneath the harvest moon. Lysandra had tried 100 ways to form the warning on her lips, but nothing came. She had no voice, no way to tell him of the danger. Her humming could carry beauty, longing, even sorrow, but not words. The prince noticed the worry in her eyes and asked, "What troubles you, my lady?" But she could only shake her head, clutching his hand, her gaze imploring him to understand something she could not say. Outside the castle walls, autumn winds carried with them a whisper of magic, and somewhere in the darkened woods, Morwen was already choosing the gown she would wear to the ball, the gown that would dazzle the prince into ruin. Lysandra knew the hour of danger was drawing near, and if she could not find a way to warn him, she feared she would lose not only her voice forever, but the prince as well. The night of the ball arrived like a jewel in a velvet box. Lanterns glowed along the castle walls, the ballroom shimmered with candlelight, and music spilled into the streets as carriages lined up one after another. Noble families in silks and jewels descended the steps, their laughter bright as the stars. Lysandra stood in the shadows of her chamber window, heart pounding. She could hear the music below, the swirl of gowns, the murmur of greetings. And she knew somewhere among the guests, Morwen was stepping into the light with the stolen beauty she had traded for Lysandra's voice. If Morwen saw her, all would be lost. The witch would end her in an instant, then carry out her plan to lure the prince to his death under the harvest moon. So Lysandra stayed hidden, Nyx perched silently at her side. She watched from the darkness as the witch entered the ballroom. Morwen's beauty was blinding, her hair a river of black silk, her skin aglow, her eyes drawing every glance like a magnet. But Lysandra saw the hunger in them. The prince was hers to ensnare, or so she thought. Yet when Morwen approached him, it was not as easy as she had imagined. The prince's smiles were polite, but distant, his gaze flickering now and then toward the upper balconies, as if searching for someone else. The witch's lips curved in a tight smile. If charm failed, she would use power. From the folds of her gown, she slipped a small crystal, whispering an ancient word into it, her voice curling through the air like smoke. It was then Lysandra moved. She had been waiting for this moment, her plan prepared. In her hands she held a tall mirror, one taken from her chamber, its frame gilded, its glass clear as still water. Quietly, she crept along the balcony that overlooked the ballroom. Then, when Morwen's spell was just beginning to coil around the prince's heart, Lysandra hurled the mirror over the railing. It crashed upon the floor between them with a thunder that silenced the music. The shards spread wide, catching the candlelight. And in their reflection, the truth appeared. No beauty, no silken hair, only the withered face of an ancient witch, eyes burning with malice. A gasp rippled through the hall. Morwen's head snapped toward the balcony, her face twisting with fury. With a shriek, she called upon her magic, and black smoke billowed into the ballroom like a living storm, cloaking every corner in shadow. Before the prince could reach her, she rose into the air, her cloak snapping like wings. The smoke curled around Lysandra, and with a sweep of her talons, the witch seized her. The last thing Lysandra saw before the darkness closed in was the prince leaping over the shattered glass toward them. When the smoke cleared, the witch was gone, and so was Lysandra. The prince stood frozen for a heartbeat, then his voice rang through the hall. "To the woods!" he cried, already mounting his horse. His men followed in a thundering rush, torches flaring against the night. Somewhere ahead, in the cold dark of the forest, the witch carried her voiceless prize back toward the circle of stones, and the harvest moon was already climbing into the sky. The witch Morwen knew the prince's heart was stubborn, and his courage even more so. He would come for the girl, she was certain of it, so she did not wait for the sacrifice hour in peace. Beneath the ancient circle of stones, she summoned the coven. One by one, shadows stepped from the forest, faces pale in the moonlight, cloaks whispering like dead leaves. Soon the clearing swarmed with witches, their eyes gleaming with the promise of blood magic. They armed themselves with spells older than kingdoms, their voices chanting in low, guttural unison, weaving wards around the circle so no man could cross unscathed. It was not long before the sound of hooves broke the stillness. The prince rode in at the head of his men, torches blazing against the night. With a cry, he drew his sword and charged. The battle was chaos. Lightning split the trees, fire coiled through the air, and steel clashed against witchcraft. Men were thrown from their saddles by invisible hands. Horses reared in terror, and the ground shook beneath the pounding of magic. For every witch that fell, another rose, and soon the prince was dragged from his horse, disarmed, and bound in ropes that bit like living serpents. They hauled him to the altar at the center of the stones, where Morwen waited with Lysandra still trapped nearby, her hands tied, Nyx caged at her feet. The harvest moon burned white overhead. Morwen lifted the prince's chin, her voice thick with triumph. At last, a heart worth breaking, she raised the ceremonial dagger. The chanting of the coven grew louder, a storm of voices calling for the sacrifice. But Lysandra's mind was already racing. Inch by inch, she worked her wrists against the coarse rope, the fibers cutting into her skin until, snap, her hands were free. She glanced to the fallen bodies of soldiers nearby and saw the glint of steel. Silent as breath, she crept behind Morwen, the sword cold and heavy in her grip. The witch drew back her arm to strike, and Lysandra drove the blade through her back, the steel sliding between bone and heart. Morwen screamed, a sound like shattering glass, her body twisted, her beauty melting away in an instant, the stolen voice spilling from her mouth in a ribbon of golden light that dissolved into the night. In the next heartbeat, she was gone, her form scattering into nothingness. The coven's chanting broke into screams as the protective wards shattered. The remaining soldiers, bloodied but alive, surged forward, cutting the prince free. He rose unsteadily, meeting Lysandra's gaze, and though her. With no time to lose, they gathered the survivors, freed Nyx, and mounted their horses. Under the watch of the fading harvest moon, they rode hard for the safety of the castle, leaving the cursed circle of stones to crumble in silence behind them. The castle gates opened wide as Prince Corvin, Lysandra, the twilight-feathered Nyx, and the weary survivors rode through under the pale light of dawn. Trumpets called from the towers, and the people rushed into the streets, cheering to see their prince returned alive. Inside the great hall, the fires roared high, casting a warm glow over stone and silk. The prince dismissed the healers for a moment and drew Lysandra aside, his eyes searching hers as if he feared she might vanish like a dream. "You risked everything for me," he said softly, his voice trembling with a weight no battle had ever given him. "Even without your voice, I heard you. Every look, every touch, you spoke to me." Lysandra's eyes glistened. She could not answer in words, but her heart was loud enough. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. And in that moment, they both knew what had been growing between them since the first time they met. The prince bent his head and kissed her, a kiss not of gratitude or rescue, but of love, deep and unshakable. And as their lips met, a warmth bloomed in Lysandra's throat. A golden light flared between them, the same that had been stolen. And when they parted, her breath caught. "My prince," she whispered, her voice clear and bright as the song she once shared with Nyx. "I love you." His smile was all the answer she needed. The weeks that followed were filled with joy and celebration. When the day of their wedding came, the bells rang from every tower, the halls overflowed with flowers, and Nyx sang from the highest balcony. Lysandra walked to him in a gown that shimmered like moonlight, her voice carrying the same melody that had first drawn them together in the woods. And so they were wed, and their song became the heart of the kingdom, a song of courage, of love, found in the darkest of places, and of a girl and a prince who had faced both magic and death to be together. They lived as all good stories promise, happily ever after.